There was a king named Xerxes who ruled over a great stretch of land from India to Ethiopia. One day the king held a feast for all his princes, nobles, and servants. It was held in the courtyard of the palace garden, which was decorated with gold, red, and gray hangings. The couches were gold and silver, and the floor was marble. The guests drank the wine out of gold cups. Each cup craved differently. Xerxes displayed all his treasures, and the feast lasted a long time. At the same time, the queen, whose name was Vashti, gave the party for all the women in the royal place. Presently, the king sent his chamberlain to bring King Vashti to him. She must wear her crown so that everyone could see how beautiful she was. But the queen refused to obey him. And it made the king very mad to think that she would not do as he said. "What shall we do to the queen for disobeying the king's order?" he said. He asked his wise men. Vashti has not only done wrong to the king, but she has wronged everybody, because if she disobeyed her husband, all the other wives will feel that they can act in the same way. Therefore, let the king send Vashti away and find a new queen who is better than she. Then all the wives will honor their husbands. The king agreed, and Vashti was no longer queen. A new queen would have to be found, so officers were sent throughout the kingdom to find all the beautiful young girls and bring them to the palace so the king could choose one of them. In the palace, there was a Hebrew. In the past, there was a Hebrew named Mordecai, sorry, who had been carried away from Jerusalem to Babylon by King Nebuchadnezzar. Mordecai had raised his beautiful cousin Esther because she was an orphan. When all the girls had been brought to the palace of Xerxes, when all the girls had been brought to the palace of Xerxes for the king to choose the new queen, Esther was among them. As soon as King Xerxes saw Esther, she became his favorite, and he gave her maids, and they had the best place in the woman's house. Mordecai was longing to know if she was the king, if the king was going to choose Esther, and every day he walked up and down near the woman's court, wondering how she was and what would become of her. Then the king saw every girl in turn. And he told them that they might ask for any gifts they want. But when it came to Esther's turn, She asked for nothing at all. The king loved Esther dearly and chose her to be his queen. He set the royal crown on her head and made a great feast. There was a man at the court of the king of King Xerxes named Haman. Haman. And the king made him more important than any man there. Everyone paid great respect to Haman, as the king had commanded, except Mordecai, who refused. When Haman realized this, he was angry. Oh, sorry. When Haman he knew that Mordecai was a Jew, and so he turned against all the Hebrew people in the kingdom. Haman went to the king and said, "There are certain people scattered throughout the land whose laws are different from yours. They do not keep the king's laws. So if it pleases the king, let it be written that they shall be destroyed. And I will give a large sum of money to those who have charge of the business to go into the king's treasury." So the king took the ring off his finger and gave it to Haman. And he said, "The money is given to you and to the people to do as you think right to those who do not obey by my laws." Then the scribes were called. And the letters were written to all the governors and rulers of every part of the kingdom. The letter said that on a certain day, all the Jewish people were ordered to be slain. When Mordecai learned that what was happening, he was very sorrow. He was put on sackcloth and ashes as a sign of mourning. And he went into the city crying aloud. As the news spread, all the Jews began weeping and wailing. And Queen Esther's servants told her about the people's distress. The queen was troubled, and she sent clothing to Mordecai, and he and he might put it on instead of the sackcloth, but he would not take off his sign of mourning. When the queen called her servant, one of the king and told her to go and ask Mordecai what was the matter.
Kill the Jews! Kill the Jews!
Mordecai told the servant all that happened, and the chamberlain hurried back to the palace to tell Queen Esther. Mordecai sent her the decree and begged her to ask the king to spare his people. When she had listened to his tales, the queen said, "Go back to Mordecai and tell him that I dare not go into the king's throne room without being sent from no one who does that lives. Only if the king holds out his scepter for his visitors to touch will his life be spared. That means that the visitors has found favor in the king's sight. I have not been called to go before the king for a whole month." Mordecai sent a message back to Esther to tell her that she ought not to be afraid to plead with the king for the Jews. "Who knows," he said, "whether you were not sent to the kingdom for this?" On the third day, Queen Esther made up her mind to be brave and to try to help Mordecai and her people. She put on her royal robes and went and stood in the inner court of the king's house, not far from the throne. The king saw Esther standing there, and he was pleased. He held out his golden scepter as a sign that she should come. Esther drew near and touched the top of the scepter. "What is your wish, Queen Esther?" said the king. "It shall be granted even to the half of my kingdom." "If it seems good to the king," Esther answered, "let the king and Haman come today to the banquet I have prepared. Tell Haman to come quickly," said King Xerxes, "to come quickly, so that we may do what Queen Esther wishes." So the king and Haman went to the queen's banquet, and while they were feasting, the queen invited them to another banquet the next day. Haman was very pleased until he saw Mordecai sitting at the king's gate, and once again the Jews would not get up or move for him. Haman went home full of indignation and told his wife what had happened. "I was the only guest at the banquet prepared by the queen except the king himself," he said. "The king has heaped honors on me, but I cannot feel happy about them until Mordecai sits at the king's gate." "Make preparations for them to die," his wife said to Haman. "Then tomorrow go enjoy yourself at the feast and speak to the king about Mordecai, said Haman. And Haman did this. The night the king could not sleep, he called for diaries of happenings in his kingdom to be read to him. Stop. And he heard of the time when Mordecai had gone to the Queen Esther about a plot against him. What was done to reward Mordecai? Asked the king and his servant told him nothing. Just then Haman arrived to ask for more Mordecai. Go. To be put to death. A servant told the king that Haman was there, and the king ordered him to be brought in. Then the king asked him a question. What shall be done to the man who the king delights to honor above everyone else? He asked. Now Haman thought, whom would the king delight to honor more than myself? So he replied, for the man who the king delights to honor, let the royal garments be brought, which the king used to wear, and the horse the king rides, and the crown which is set on his head. And let the clothes and the horse and the crown be given to one of the most noble princes, that he may dress up the man who the king delights to honor. And let the prince bring him on a horseback through the city and proclaim before him. This is done to the man whom it is pleasured of the king to honor. Then said the king, quickly, take the royal clothes and the horse, as you have said to Mordecai to the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Haman was dismayed and angry, but there was nothing he could do. He was obligated to do to Mordecai as he himself had suggested. He dressed Mordecai in the king's robes and put the crown on his head, and he set him on the horse and led him in triumph through the city. But afterwards, Haman arrived home and told his wife everything that had happened. It looked as though you have to bow before Mordecai and his people, she said. They were still talking when chamberlains arrived to take Haman to Queen Esther's second banquet, and he was forced to go with them. When the king and Haman were at Queen Esther's second banquet, the king said to her, "What is your greatest wish, Queen Esther? It shall be granted to the half of my kingdom." "If I had found favor in your sight, O king," Esther answered, "I ask for my life and for the life of my fellow Jews, for someone is plotting to kill us all." "Who is he, and where is he? Who declares to do this?" the king said angrily. "Our enemy is this wicked Haman." Said Queen Esther. The king rose from the table and strode out into the garden. Haman feeling very afraid, asked the queen to spare his life, for he was certain the king would not let him live. Haman was right, for the king ordered him to be put to death. And he gave Haman's house to Queen Esther's. She in turn gave it to Mordecai, and then the king gave Mordecai the royal ring. Which he once given to Haman. Again, the king held out his scepter for his queen to touch, as she made her wish. "If it pleases the king," she said, "let letters be sent to all the governors, telling them that the Jews are to live in safety." The king did as she said. Scribes were called to write letters. And Mordecai and Queen Esther saw that they were sealed with the king's ring, which meant that no one would dare to disobey. Then the letters were carried in all directions by men riding on camels, horses, and mules. They took the news to every province from India to Ethiopia. Mordecai left the palace wearing royal robes of blue and a great crown of gold, and all the Jews were proud and happy when they saw him. They planned a feast in honor, and this great day and all that Queen Esther and Mordecai had done for their people. The end. The end.
About